Hey everyone, welcome back to the Let's Talk Teaching podcast. I am your host, Kayla Durkin, and today I am hoping to make all of your teacher dreams come true by sharing real tips that you can use that will help you optimize your prep time and stick to your contracted hours. As a teacher, we want to do all the things, and we all know that just because we aren't physically at school doesn't mean we aren't thinking of school. From lesson planning to grading to thinking about our students, our minds are always on teaching, especially as first or second year teachers. When I first started teaching, teaching was my life. It's what I did. I was a teacher. That's who I was. It defined me as a person. Teaching was my whole world. From going in early every single morning to staying late every single night, plus going into my classroom every single Sunday after church, it consumed me. Now, I really don't want you to take that in a negative way because it really did consume me in all the best ways. Although I was spending, I don't know, 50 to 60 hours a week working, I loved it and I wouldn't change a thing about that. However, that first year of teaching, I was single as a Pringle and teaching was my sole purpose at that point in my life. Sure, I enjoyed seeing my friends on the weekend, but my coworkers quickly became my closest friends. So I wasn't really rushing to meet anyone after work because everyone I was going to see was already at the school with me. I also enjoyed going to work out, but at the same time, I was getting 10,000 steps every single day in my classroom. So if I missed a workout here or there, it just wasn't really that big of a deal. What I'm getting at though is, you guys already know that I had zero systems or processes in place my first year of teaching, nothing that would help me make my life easier and nothing that would help me get out of there at a decent time. But I guess it really didn't even matter because everything I wanted to do revolved around teaching. I just loved it that much. And it's not that I don't love it now, but it wasn't until the end of my first year of teaching that Brent came into my life. Even then, though, Brent respected the hours that I was investing into my classroom. He knew how important my students were to me, and he never wanted to come between me and school. Our relationship was just so new during that first year of teaching, especially because it was at the end of my first year of teaching. Anytime I texted him to say that I was going to stay late or that I wouldn't be able to meet up later that night just really wasn't that big of a deal. However, our relationship did progress pretty quickly over the summer, and by December, we were engaged. We were then married 6 months later in June. And with all of that, I have to say my passion for teaching was still on fire, but my purpose in life started to shift a little bit. That second year of teaching showed me that I could still be the teacher my students needed me to be, but I needed to prioritize what was and wasn't important. And I needed to get rid of all the fluff and the busy work and start prioritizing my time while I was in my classroom. You all know that I always say you're a person first and a teacher second, and that's what today's episode is all about. It's okay for teaching to be your passion, but I want you to have other passions in life too. If you're a first year teacher listening to this right now and your first year of teaching sounds a lot like mine, that's okay. If you've been teaching for a while and you're okay with your time being solely devoted to your students in your classroom, that's okay too. But if you are ready to begin remembering who you are as a person outside of the classroom, then you're in the right place. For me, it was when I began stepping into my role as a fiance that I realized the way I was doing business just wasn't sustainable for my life. I didn't want my future husband to not know if I was going to make it home for supper that night. I didn't want Brent to feel like he came second in my life. But you have to remember that I had to make this choice. I had to first accept that I was going to be putting systems in place that would allow me to have my free time back. But then I actually had to start executing that plan. That meant that less time was going to be spent in the hallways, checking the staff room for my mid afternoon treat, and more time sticking to my to do list and to my assigned tasks for that day. It also meant less time chatting with my coworkers before school, during my prep, and after school. I really had to start using the time I was being given wisely so that I wouldn't have to spend as much time doing things later. Now, I do need you to know that these things didn't happen overnight. I didn't just wake up one day and from that point forward use all of my prep time wisely. Not even close. There were still days I just couldn't even think about doing one more thing. There were also days that I spent my entire prep time scrolling social media because that's all I could handle for that day. But I'm a human too. There were even nights that I still brought things home, stayed late here or there, or even did still go in on the weekend. But what I do want you to hear me say right now is that the extra time that I was spending eventually became a choice, not a necessity. I was choosing to go above and beyond in my planning, and I was choosing to get things organized for the week ahead. I no longer felt like I had to. I was suddenly choosing to take things home because I wanted to get ahead, not because I was trying to survive and be ready for the very next day. So let's get into the nitty gritty of things. How did I go from spending an extra 10 to 20 hours a week in my classroom to suddenly sticking to my contract hours? Well, first things first, tip number one is all about the mindset and the manifestation. Now, you guys know I don't necessarily like the word manifestation, but I had to accept that I was still a good teacher, even if I didn't take my teaching bag home every single night, which you guys know that's a backpack. I'm sure you've heard that episode. I had to accept that I was a person first and a teacher second. I had to start prioritizing me again and remembering the things that I enjoyed doing in my free time before I became a teacher: going to the gym, spending time outside, cooking a real meal for supper, and not just having a microwavable dinner every single night when I got home. Honestly, at first it was really hard. As a teacher, there are always so many more things we can be doing, but I had to accept that there was just no way possible that the work as a teacher was ever going to be done. I had to set a boundary for myself and I had to draw that line. The second thing I started doing was working smarter, not harder. As teachers, there are a million different ways that we can literally do every single activity in our classroom. And instead of trying to do 10 million activities with my students, I started realizing that if I got into a routine with certain activities, then my classroom management would become easier too. For example, Monday's word work and Monday's work on writing work started to become the same thing every single Monday. Tuesday's word work and Tuesday's work on writing work started to become the same thing every single Tuesday. And guess what? That followed suit for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Instead of trying to introduce a new word work activity or a new work on writing activity every single day of the week, every single week, I started to repeat some of those activities for 2 or 3 or even 4 weeks at a time, with just a slight variation each week that went along with our target standards and our vocabulary words and all of that good stuff. And then after a few weeks, I would change things up and introduce a new activity for Monday and a new activity for Tuesday and a new activity for Wednesday. But I wasn't trying to do a new activity every single day of the week, every single week for every single month. And you get the point. By doing this, I suddenly had some routine in my planning, which took some time off of my plate, but my classroom management got better at the same time because my students suddenly knew what was expected of them on Mondays, what was expected of them on Tuesdays, what was expected of them on Thursdays and Wednesdays and Fridays and all the other days. Everything just started to fall into place. My students were feeling confident and capable in the activities that they were doing. I was able to start getting some of my lesson planning done ahead of time because I knew what to expect for the next week. It was a win-win situation for everyone. Once I started choosing activities that I knew were going to work for a few weeks at a time, though, this leads me into tip number 3. I realized I could start batching my lesson planning. As an elementary teacher, this happened to be subject by subject. I know this is going to shock everyone, but the very first subject I ever mapped out, are you ready for it? I bet you're thinking it's math, but it's actually science. Science. I mapped out my science first and I prepped out my entire science unit all at one time. Every activity, every lesson, every resource that I needed for that unit, I got it all ready in one sitting. And then guess what? I didn't have to think about science for the next 3 weeks because it was completely ready. Everything I needed was good to go. And then guess what? I mapped out another subject, and I bet you know what it is: social studies. I planned out our entire homestead project, every rubric, every checkpoint, every resource my students would need. And then for the next month, I had my science and my social studies completely planned so that I could focus some of my time and energy on reading and math. And that's where it hit me. I realized I could start mapping out all of my units for all of my subjects. You guys know, I've said it again and again. I was surviving day by day in math class because we did not have a curriculum. And once I started to begin with the end in mind, which that's my second Stephen Covey reference from the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Did you catch the first one? It's a good book if you haven't. But once I started to begin with the end in mind and map out entire units at a time, everything in my life got that much easier, which brings me to tip number 4. Once I realized I could start batching my lesson planning, I was hooked. That was the turning point for me. I finally realized I do not have to do every single thing every single day. It is just not sustainable. I didn't have time to lesson plan every single day. I didn't have time to make copies every single day. I didn't have time to grade papers every single day. And when I maybe even thought I had time, I probably wasn't doing any of those good because I was trying to do all of them so fast in such a short amount of time to try and get every single thing checked off my to do list every single day. But this goes back to tip number 1, where I said I had to accept that the work would never be done and that it was my job to set the boundary and draw the line. So, this is finally where I realized I could truly leave at contracted time if I stuck to this single tip right here. I knew I couldn't do all the things every single day, so I stopped trying to do all of the things every single day. Instead, I began dedicating my prep time once a week to each important task. The first one I started with was grading, especially once I began teaching 5 different math classes in that middle school secondary math position. I could not physically keep up the grading without losing my mind. Seventh grade math, pre algebra, geometry, I couldn't do it. So instead, I decided just to do all of my grading on Tuesdays. Why did I choose Tuesdays? Well, at both of the schools I've worked at, they have always pulled eligibility results on Wednesday mornings. So I needed to get all of my grading done by Wednesdays anyway. So Tuesdays became the day. For the most part, I could get all of my grading done on Tuesdays if I began to use my time wisely on Tuesdays. There were special occasions where I would still take grading home and finish it while I was watching The Bachelor or Bachelorette, but usually I was able to get it done within my contracted hours. Now, I do want you to know I had a super organized way of doing this. And once I became good at it, I didn't even have to think twice about what I was doing. And I'll actually take a deep dive into this grading system that I used. I think I'm going to dedicate an entire podcast episode to it. But for now, I just want you to understand that I wasn't grading every single day of the week. I was grading once a week on Tuesdays, getting it in the grade book, done with it, was not looking back at anything else again until the next Tuesday. From there, each and every day of the week had one major priority for that day, and I stuck to it. Mondays was kind of a catch up day, going through emails, going through important documents, figuring out what kind of needed to happen for the week. Tuesdays, of course, were grading. Wednesdays were dedicated to lesson planning, those unit maps, curriculum maps, getting everything ready. And if you need to take a deep dive into that, I have the resource for you. Go to ndteaching.com/map. That's going to show you how I created my scope and sequence and my curriculum maps, which I know will change your life if you take the time to make them for you. So definitely go check that out. That was www.ndteaching.com/map. Thursdays were dedicated to making all the copies, prepping all the supplies, getting everything I needed ready for the next week. And then Fridays were kind of the days where I just regrouped and made sure everything was ready for Monday. I posted my lesson plans online. I organized my classroom. I just made sure that everything was good to go. I wrote my agenda up for the week so that I could leave on Fridays and not have to think about it again until Monday. Now, with these 4 tips, if I could go back and do it all over again, I probably would have started with batching first, but you just don't know what you don't know. And that was me. I didn't know that that was even a thing. I didn't know it was okay to do all my planning at one time. I didn't know it was possible to do all of my grading at one time. I didn't even have a reason to do any of that because I didn't need to stick to my contracted hours. I didn't have anyone to rush home to, not even a pet. What I want you to know, though, is that these things do not happen overnight. And you don't just magically wake up one day and have your curriculum map made. You don't just wake up one day and never stay past contract hours again. At the end of the day, we are humans first and teachers second, but there still might be days that you do need to take a few tests home to grade. But my hope for you is that it becomes a choice and not a necessity. I want this for you so that your teaching career is sustainable, but that's just another win-win. And plus, if you already know you're leaving at contracted time, that means you have more time for happy hour. Once you've set that intention though, start choosing one thing that you can focus on one day a week. Start small. For the next weeks to come, just start doing one single thing on Tuesdays. You're only going to do it on Tuesdays. Then maybe on Wednesdays, you start doing the same thing on Wednesdays. Then on Thursdays, you start doing the same thing on Thursdays. Who knows? By January, you might be in full on teacher batching mode. So, if you need a little bit of help with this, I think I'm going to do another podcast episode as well so that you can start prioritizing what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. So, stay tuned. I think I'll actually do that podcast next week. So, next week, I'll tell you how you can start figuring out what you're going to do every single day of the week. But in the meantime, just remember that you have to put yourself first. For me, it was stepping into my role as a fiance and then as a wife. I knew that future me would want to be home for suppers each night with my husband. I knew that I needed to start prioritizing my health and getting to the gym after school. I really just had to start adding myself to my to do list so that I could continue to give my students everything they needed without forgetting who I was as a person in the process. So, as we end here today, know this: you are worth leaving your teacher bag at school. You are not less of a teacher if you stay late or go in on the weekends. You can still make an impact while putting your health and your family first. Honestly, you'll probably make an even bigger impact because you'll be less stressed. As always, though, if you need anything at all, head on over to Instagram. You can find me at North Dakota Teaching. Send me a message and let's chat about this. And then I do have one ask for you today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, it would mean the world to me if you could take just a couple minutes to go down below and leave a review. We have over 100 amazing educators listening to this podcast every single week, which is so cool. 100 might not sound like a lot to you, but 100 is huge to me. So there's over 100 of you listening every single week, but I only have 5 reviews on this podcast. So if some of you could just take some time to go down below and leave a review, the more reviews we have, the more relevant this podcast looks in iTunes. And the more relevant it looks, the more teachers we can help serve, which is what this is all about. It is just free content for any teacher who's looking for more. So if you have a few minutes, please go down below and leave a review. And then guess what? Next week, I'm actually going to be giving away a few gift cards to a handful of people who left reviews. So this is your chance now. Get your review in now so that you can win some gift cards next week. And with that, I will see you then. Have a fantastic weekend, everyone.